The emergency room doors blew open at 11:47 p.m. Two masked men in tactical vests walked in like they owned the place, and within 30 seconds, they did. One fired a round into the ceiling. Plaster dust rained down on screaming patients. The other grabbed a nurse by her scrubs and threw her onto the linoleum floor hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. She landed on her hands and knees in front of 30 people. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The bigger gunman crouched down and grabbed her by the jaw. "You," he said, "you're going to save my boy. Or I start shooting patients until someone does." She looked up at him through the hair falling across her face. 33 years old, 5'4", a trauma nurse no one at Redstone Regional ever looked twice at. She said, very quietly, "I'm only a nurse." He laughed. Every single person in that room would remember that laugh. Because 12 minutes later, when the real threat arrived, an armed unit ordered to eliminate everyone inside. It wasn't the police who stopped them. It was her. Before we go any further, if this story finds you tonight, follow along to the very end. Hit like and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The shift had been quiet, which always made Claire Bennett nervous. Quiet at Redstone Regional Medical Center didn't mean peaceful. It meant the waiting room had finally cleared out after a brutal Tuesday. 2 car accidents, 1 diabetic crash, a toddler with a fishbone lodged in his throat, and the ER staff were now scattered across the unit, doing the kind of low-energy tasks that filled the dead hours between midnight and dawn. Restocking, charting, eating vending machine food over a keyboard. The overhead fluorescents buzzed at their usual frequency, the kind of sound you stopped hearing after your first week on the job and never got back. Claire had been at Redstone for 2 years, 8 months, and, as of tonight, 17 hours. She was covering a double because Tran called out sick, and because she was the only one who hadn't complained loud enough to make the charge nurse feel guilty about asking. That was how it always went. The people who made the least noise got handed the most weight, and Claire had learned a long time ago to carry it without comment. She was at the supply cart near Trauma Bay 2, cross-checking a restock sheet against actual inventory when Dr. Harlan Voss walked past without looking at her and told the air approximately 2 feet to her left that Bed 7 needed a new IV line. "I'll get it," she said. He was already gone. She got it. That was the job. Not glamorous, not acknowledged, just done. Claire had worked under 4 different ER attendings in her time at Redstone, and not one of them had learned to say her name correctly on the first try. Voss called her Bennett, 1T. The hospitalist on nights called her the blonde one, which was accurate but not her name. The department chief, Dr. Morris Callum, had stopped by the ER exactly twice since she started, and both times he'd spoken only to Voss and walked past the nursing staff like furniture. She didn't take it personally. Or she'd stopped trying to. Her locker held 3 things that no one at Redstone knew about: a photograph, a folded piece of paper with a number on it she hadn't called in 2 years, and a small worn challenge coin from a unit that didn't officially exist. She kept the locker padlocked and the conversation surface level, and most of her coworkers assumed she was just quiet. She was quiet. That part was accurate. At 11:43 p.m., she was walking back toward the nursing station with a bag of saline when the ambulance bay doors opened and 2 men walked in. She noticed them wrong. That was how she'd describe it later, in her own head. Not that anything was visibly off. They were dressed like paramedics moving with purpose, pushing a gurney with a figure strapped to it. But something about the way the taller one's eyes moved across the room, systematic, fast, mapping, made the back of her neck pull tight. She kept walking, set down the saline, watched from her peripheral. The figure on the gurney was a young man, maybe 25, with a gunshot wound to the right side. She could see the soaked compression dressing from 20 feet away. Whoever had applied it knew what they were doing. It wasn't a first attempt. The pressure was correct. The angle, deliberate. That wasn't a paramedic pack job. That was field work. She reached the station counter and quietly set her hand on the desk phone. Before she could lift it, the taller man reached the center of the ER, stopped the gurney, and fired 1 round into the ceiling. The sound was enormous in the enclosed space. A patient in the waiting area screamed. An orderly dropped a tray. The two nurses near trauma bay, one flattened against the wall before they even consciously decided to move. "Everyone on the floor!" The tall one swept his weapon across the room. "Now, hands where I can see them." The second man, shorter, wider, moving on the balls of his feet, came around the perimeter fast, hitting the security station and shoving the overnight guard against the wall before he could reach his radio. The guard was 53 years old and had worked nights at Redstone for 11 years. He didn't resist. Claire stepped back from the counter, not because she panicked, because moving to the open center of the room would have been stupid, and putting her back against something was better than not. She lowered herself to the floor the way she was told, hands visible, and stayed very still. The tall man found her immediately. He walked over, grabbed her scrubs at the shoulder, and pulled her upright with enough force that her knee hit the floor hard before she got her feet under her. He walked her to the center of the room, the linoleum, the open space under the white lights, and pushed her down. She landed on her palms, stayed there. "You," he said, crouching. He got his hand under her jaw, fingers pressing into the hinge, and turned her face up toward him. Up close, she could see his eyes behind the mask. Alert, focused, and some kind of pain he was managing. "My brother needs surgery right now. You're going to do it, or I start putting bullets in people." "I'm a nurse," she said. "Then get a doctor." "I'm the most qualified person in this room right now," she said, which was true and also not something she could explain. She kept her voice level. "Let me look at him." He stared at her for a long moment. "You run," he said, "and I shoot the kid in bed 3. There was, in fact, a 12-year-old in bed 3. Appendectomy prep. She knew because she'd taken his vitals 2 hours ago, and he'd asked if she thought the Cubs had a shot this year. "I'm not going to run," she said. He let go of her jaw. She stood up slowly and walked to the gurney. The wounded man's name, she'd learned later, was Dario, 26. The gunshot had entered just below the right rib cage, and the exit wound wasn't clean. It had fragmented against something on the way through, and the compression dressing was doing its job, but not for much longer. He was losing pressure. His color was wrong. The tall man, the one who'd thrown her to the floor, stood 2 feet back with his weapon pointed at the far wall, but angled to track her. "Save him," he said. His voice had dropped. Still hard, but there was something underneath it now. "He's all I've got." His name, she'd learn even later, was Marco Vela, 29. The younger brother, ironically, was the one on the gurney. She didn't know any of that yet. What she knew was the anatomy in front of her, the rate of blood loss, and the 3 to 4 minute window before Dario Vela entered a deterioration she couldn't reverse in a trauma bay without a full OR team. She pulled on gloves, turned to the nearest nurse still standing, Pauline, 41, charge nurse on nights, currently pressed against the wall with her arms crossed over her chest, and said, "Pauline, I need a crash cart and a thoracic tray. The sealed one, not the floor stock." Pauline looked at Marco. Marco looked at Pauline. "Do what she says," he said. Pauline went. Claire worked fast and without theater. She cut the dressing, assessed the wound, applied a new occlusive seal while calling out her findings to the room the way she'd been trained to call them, in conditions where no one could see her hands. Blood pressure, breath sounds, the specific quality of pallor around the mouth that told her Dario had maybe 90 seconds before she lost the window entirely. "Step back," she said. Marco didn't move. "I'm not asking for space," she said. "I'm telling you he'll be dead in 60 seconds if you're still in my light." She looked at him directly. "Move." He moved. She worked. Dr. Voss appeared at the edge of her peripheral vision, having finally processed what was happening. He looked at the gurney, at the weapons, at Claire, and then took 3 steps backward and said nothing. She didn't blame him. She also didn't wait for him. She stabilized Dario Vela in 11 minutes using the materials in the thoracic tray. A second IV she ran herself, and a technique for managing a fragment injury that she had learned in a place she never talked about under conditions that didn't make it into any civilian trauma course. Dario's color improved. His pressure steadied. She stripped the second glove and dropped it in the biohazard bin. "He's stable," she said. "He needs an OR within the hour, or this holds for about 40 minutes. That's not me stalling, that's the injury. Marco looked at his brother. Dario's chest rose and fell. The monitors tracked a rhythm that was bad but no longer immediately fatal. Something moved in Marco's face. Not softness. He didn't have that in him. Something older, something tired. "Okay," he said. "Okay." While the second gunman, whose name she never learned that night, kept the waiting room contained, Claire stayed near the gurney. She was doing what looked like monitoring. What she was actually doing was building a map. 14 people in the ER. 6 staff, including herself, Pauline, Voss, a resident named Parks, who'd flattened himself against the supply room wall and hadn't moved, 2 techs, and the security guard. 8 patients at various stages of treatment. 2 armed men, 1 primary weapon each. 2 sidearms she'd clocked when they walked in. Marco kept his at low ready. The shorter man, the perimeter one, was rotating a pattern she'd tracked to roughly 90-second intervals. Emergency exits. 1 to the ambulance bay, currently Marco's territory. 1 at the far end of the hall, locked but not sealed. 1 through the supply corridor that connected to the stairwell. She knew all 3 without appearing to look for them. She was also watching Marco watch her, which told her something she filed away. He was not entirely sure what she was. That uncertainty was something she could work with if it came to that. She hoped it wouldn't come to that. At 12:31 a.m., 44 minutes after the doors blew open, her hope evaporated. She heard the second gunman's radio click twice. Short burst. Pattern. He stopped his rotation immediately and moved toward Marco. Their body language changed, not relaxed. The opposite. Whatever just came through that radio made them both tighter, faster, more controlled. Marco turned to her and said, "Get away from the gurney." She didn't argue. She stepped back. Pauline appeared at her left shoulder. "What's happening?" she breathed. "I don't know yet," Claire said, which wasn't entirely true. She knew the sound a situation made when it was about to get worse. She'd heard it before, in completely different contexts, under completely different skies. There was a frequency to it, a kind of atmospheric pressure drop that happened when a second variable entered the equation that hadn't been accounted for. She'd heard that frequency before. She heard it now. At 12:37 a.m., the ambulance bay doors opened again. Not the way they'd opened the first time, loud, deliberate, for effect. These doors opened fast and quiet. 4 men in black tactical gear came through, and the difference between them and Marco's crew was immediately visible to anyone who'd ever been anywhere near professional violence. These men moved like they'd done this before, many times, under worse conditions. One of them shot Marco's second man before Marco even had time to turn around. The sound of that shot, a suppressed pop, not the ceiling cracker from earlier, changed the air in the room. The patients who'd been quiet since Marco's arrival started moving, which was the worst thing they could do. Voss grabbed a patient by the arm and pulled him behind a curtain. Pauline pushed herself flat against the supply cart. Claire didn't move. She was watching the 4 men spread through the ER with the particular economy of a team that had a timeline and a target list. Marco turned toward her, and in his face she saw the thing she hadn't expected to see. Fear. Not the ordinary kind. The kind that comes when you realize the situation you thought you were controlling is actually much larger than you understood. "Who are they?" he demanded. "They're not here for you," she said. Which was the truth. They weren't. She'd clocked it in the first 5 seconds. The way they'd moved past Dario's gurney without slowing, the way the lead man's eyes had swept across the hostage layout and dismissed it. This wasn't a rival crew. This wasn't law enforcement. This was a cleanup. Someone, somewhere, had decided that a messy situation in a hospital emergency room needed to become a very different kind of problem, the kind where there were no survivors to testify about anything. The lead man stopped in the center of the room and looked at the assembled patients, staff, and Marco's crew with the expression of someone reviewing a task list. Claire counted 7 seconds. Then she turned to Pauline and said, very quietly, "Get everyone into the supply corridor, right now. Don't run. Walk." Pauline looked at her. "Claire." "Pauline." She kept her voice below the sound of the tactical team moving through the room. "I need you to trust me and move in the next 10 seconds. Something in her voice did something to Pauline's hesitation. Pauline moved. Claire turned back to the room, to Marco Vela, who was now the least dangerous person in the ER, and to the lead man, who had just made eye contact with her across 20 feet of fluorescent lit linoleum. He looked at her the way people always looked at her, like she wasn't a threat, like she wasn't anything at all. She looked back at him with her hands loose at her sides and her weight settled the way a person's weight settles when they are done deciding what to do and have moved into the part that comes after deciding. She reached up and unclipped the ID badge from her scrubs. Let it fall. The lead man took a step toward her. And Claire Bennett, who had spent 2 years, 8 months, and 17 hours being the quiet woman nobody noticed at Redstone Regional Medical Center, stepped to meet him. Behind her, unnoticed by everyone in the room, her left hand had slipped free of the zip tie that Marco's second man had put on her wrist 20 minutes ago. She'd worked it loose in under 4 minutes. Old habit. The lead man's name, she'd learned later, was Garrick. That was what his team called him. Whether it was a first name, a last name, or something he'd picked up along the way some men picked up scars, she never found out. What she knew in the moment he took that first step toward her was the way he moved. Weight forward, shoulders relaxed, the particular unhurried quality of a man who had never once in his life felt outmatched. He was about to feel it now. She didn't run at him. That was the first thing people always got wrong about situations like this. The ones who'd only seen it in movies ran at things. Claire moved laterally, 2 steps to her right, which put a supply cart between her and his nearest teammate and forced Garrick to recalculate his angle. It was half a second of adjustment. That was all she needed. He grabbed for her left arm. She let him get it. Then she turned into the grab instead of away from it, into him, inside his reach. And the mechanical advantage shifted in a way that physics didn't care about relative size or gender. His wrist went the direction wrists weren't designed to go. Not broken. She wasn't trying to break it. She was trying to make a point, and she made it. He went to one knee, and the weapon in his right hand clattered across the linoleum. 3 seconds. His nearest teammate swung toward her, and she was already moving, putting Garrick's mass between herself and the line of fire in the same motion she used to come back upright. She had his sidearm now, so taken from the holster at his hip during the turn. She pressed it against the back of his neck and looked across the room at the remaining 3 members of his team. Stop, she said. They stopped. Not because she'd said it, because the man on one knee in front of her was clearly the one they answered to, and he'd just gone very still in the particular way that people go still when they understand that the situation has changed faster than they can explain. The ER was quiet except for a monitor still beeping in Bay 4 and the sound of someone crying softly behind a curtain. Marco Vela was pressed against the far wall with his weapon pointed at the floor, which was either tactical or just shock. She couldn't tell yet. Phones, radios, and long guns on the floor, she said to Garrick's team. Do it slow. Nobody moved. He's not dead, she said. That can change in the next 4 seconds, or it can stay the way it is. Your choice. The man nearest the ambulance bay, shorter, with a shaved head and a scar across his chin, looked at Garrick. Garrick said nothing. Then he said, very carefully, do it. Equipment hit the floor. She exhaled slowly, kept the weapon exactly where it was. This was the part no one talked about. The part after the immediate action, when your hands were steady, but your chest was doing something your body thought was optional. She'd felt it hundreds of times in the field, and she'd never found a way to make it comfortable. You just kept moving. Pauline, she called out, loud enough to carry to the supply corridor. A beat. Then, here. How many with you? 11. All staff and patients. Dr. Voss he's okay. Stay there. She looked at Marco. You. Come here. He came. Slowly, weapon still pointed at the floor, and she noticed that he hadn't raised it at Garrick's team even when they'd come in shooting. Either he was smarter than she'd initially read, or he was too frightened to think tactically. Either way, right now he was useful. Zip ties, she said. Your partner had them. Find them. He found them. She directed him to secure Garrick's team one by one, wrists behind the back, ankles the way she specified, while she kept the sidearm steady and watched all 4 corners of the room. It was slow, Marco's hands were shaking badly enough that he had to redo the second man's wrists twice. She didn't rush him. Garrick didn't say anything until his own ankles were done. Then he looked up at her with an expression she'd seen before on men who just reassessed something they thought they understood. "Who are you?" he said. "A nurse," she said. He looked at the way she was standing, the weapon, the angle she'd maintained on his entire team for the past 6 minutes. "No," he said. "You're not." "Tonight, I am." She looked at Marco. His radio. "Bring it to me." The radio told her more than she'd hoped. She kept the volume low and listened while Marco zip-tied the last of Garrick's team to the nurse's station support rail. The channel was encrypted but not scrambled. Someone had gotten cheap or careless, and what came through in fragments over the next 4 minutes was enough to build a picture she didn't love. Garrick's team wasn't freelance. They had a coordinator. She could hear the pattern in how the traffic moved, the structure of the check-ins. Someone in a vehicle outside the building, maybe a second team staged, and the objective hadn't changed, which meant that securing 4 men to a railing in the ER had bought time, but not resolution. She clicked off the radio and set it on the counter. Marco was looking at her the way people looked at things they couldn't categorize. "There's more of them," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes." "How many?" "Don't know yet." She looked at Dario's gurney. His pressure red was holding, barely. "Your brother needs that OR window. That window is closing." Marco made a sound in his chest that wasn't quite a word. "I'm not leveraging him," she said. "I'm telling you the medical reality. If you want him to survive tonight, we need to move him up to surgical, and I can't do that while I'm managing this room." She looked at him directly. "So I need to know if you're going to be a problem." He looked at his brother, at Garrick's team on the floor, at her. "No," he said. "I'm not a problem." She held his gaze for a moment. Something in his face was genuinely wrecked. Not criminal calculation, just a man who'd made a catastrophically bad decision trying to save someone he loved and was now standing in the wreckage of it. She didn't feel sorry for him, but she understood the architecture. "Radio Pauline," she said. "Tell her Dr. Voss needs to come out. Just Voss. Nobody else yet." Well, Voss came out looking like a man who'd aged a decade in 40 minutes, which was fair. He stopped when he saw Garrick's team on the floor, looked at the weapon in Claire's hand, and then looked at Claire in a way she'd never been looked at by anyone at Redstone before. "I need you to take Dario Vela up to OR2, she said. "Call ahead to Strauss. She's on overnight surgical. Tell her it's a fragment injury, right lower quadrant. She'll need a thoracic assist ready." "Claire?" "Dr. Voss." She kept her voice the same register it had been since the ceiling shot. Level. Not cold exactly, but not flexible. "He has about 25 minutes before the stabilization. I did starts failing. Can you make that call?" Voss pulled out his phone. His hands were shaking. He made the call. She watched the corridor while he talked, tracking the entrance points, running the timeline. Garrick's coordinator would expect a check-in. How long before they sent a second unit to investigate silence? 10 minutes, maybe less. She needed everyone out of the ER. "Pauline," she called. Pauline appeared in the supply corridor doorway, expression somewhere between terrified and furious. "I need everyone moved to the second floor. Use the stairwell, not the elevator. It's louder. Keep the patients together and get them into the surgical waiting area. Lock the corridor doors behind you." Claire, that's 12 people. 4 of them can't walk. "The 2 techs can manage the wheelchair patients. Parks can take the ambulatory ones. You coordinate." She paused. "You've done harder things than this." Pauline looked at her for a long moment. "Have I?" "Yes," Claire said. "You have." Pauline went. She moved Garrick's team into the storage room off the main corridor. 4 men, wrists and ankles secured, radio confiscated. It was the most defensible contained space in the ER. No windows, 1 door, hinged inward. She used Garrick's own belt to loop the door handle to the crash cart she pushed against it. Not impenetrable, but it would take time. Time was the only currency she had left. Marco helped her move Dario's gurney to the elevator without speaking. In the elevator, with the doors closed, he said, "You served." It wasn't a question. She didn't answer. "The way you moved," he said. "Back there with Garrick. That's not... Nurses don't do that." "Some do," she said. He looked at her sideways. He was scared and tired and something else she couldn't name, something that looked almost like remorse, which she wasn't sure he'd earned yet. "I'm sorry," he said, "for the floor, for grabbing you." The elevator opened. She pushed the gurney out without responding. Not because she didn't hear him, because there wasn't room for that right now, and because sorry was a word that was easy to say in an elevator when you needed something from the person you were saying it to. She'd decide what to do with Marco Vela later, assuming there was a later. OR2 was ready. Strauss, Dr. Nadia Strauss, the overnight surgical attending, who was 54 and had the particular calm of someone who'd been doing this long enough to find chaos familiar, took one look at Dario's chart and Claire's face and didn't ask any questions. "Go," she said to Claire. "I've got him." "He needs..." "I can read the tray you set up," Strauss said. "It's good work. Go do whatever you need to do." Claire went. The second-floor corridor was quiet. Through the window at the far end, Ashford was doing what Ashford did at 1 a.m. Dark, still, a few lit windows scattered across the skyline. She could see the parking structure from here, and in the parking structure, on the third level, she could see a dark SUV with its engine running. Garrick's coordinator. She'd figured the second team was staged outside, but knowing the location changed the math. If they breached from the ground floor while she was up here, she had no angle. She needed higher or she needed out. And getting out meant moving 12 compromised civilians through a building that might have a secondary team approaching. She was pulling through the options when she heard footsteps on the stairwell. Not Pauline's, not the tech's. The weight distribution was wrong, too even, too deliberate. Someone who was trying to be quiet and was mostly succeeding. She pressed against the wall beside the stairwell door and waited. The door opened. The man who came through was dressed like a janitor. Gray coveralls, mop bucket, he let go of the moment he cleared the door, which told her the janitor outfit was recent acquisition. He had a radio earpiece, and his right hand was reaching toward his waistband when she stepped in and stopped it. 20 seconds of controlled violence. She put him on the floor with his arm behind his back and his cheek against the linoleum, breathing hard but otherwise intact. "Second team," she said. "How many?" He didn't answer. She applied a specific pressure to a specific point on his forearm that was not something she'd learned in nursing school. "3," he said through his teeth. "Ground floor, coming in through the service entrance." 3 minutes. Maybe less. She cuffed his hands with his own zip ties. He'd had them in his pocket, because of course he had, and used his radio earpiece to listen. What she heard stopped her, not the approach of the second team. She'd expected that. What she hadn't expected was the third voice on the channel, not Garrick's coordinator, not the tactical team. A different register, calmer. The voice of someone sitting somewhere comfortable and managing this situation from a distance. And what that voice said in clipped instructions to the second team was, "Take the hard drive from the administrator's office first, then clean the rest." She stayed very still. Hard drive, administrator's office. She thought about Dr. Morris Callum, who had visited the ER exactly twice in 2 years and 8 months. She thought about the way the attack had started, targeted, purposeful, aimed specifically at the hospital's records infrastructure before the gunmen had even made their demands clear. She thought about the shape this had been all along, and how she'd been looking at the wrong side of it. This wasn't about Dario Vela. Dario Vela was a coincidence. A wounded man who happened to come through the doors on the same night someone had decided to use a hostage situation as cover for something else entirely. The real objective was in the administrator's office on the 4th floor. She pulled the earpiece out and looked at the stairwell door. The second team was 30 seconds from the ground floor service entrance. Pauline and 11 civilians were 60 feet down this corridor. The administrator's office was 2 floors up. She couldn't be in 3 places at once, which had always been the fundamental problem with operating alone, and she'd always known it, and it had never once stopped her from trying. She was on her feet and moving toward the stairwell when the lights went out. Every single one of them, floor by floor, from the bottom up, like something pulling a shade. Emergency lighting clicked on. dim red strips along the floor. And in the new dark, she could hear, very clearly, the sound of the service entrance door being forced open somewhere below. The second team was inside, and somewhere in the dark above her, whatever was on that hard drive was about to disappear. She took the stairs two at a time and didn't look back. The fourth floor was darker than the floors below it. The emergency strips gave out at the stairwell landing, a maintenance failure or something deliberate, she couldn't tell yet. And the corridor ahead of her ran in pure black for about 30 feet before a secondary strip flickered on near the far exit. She stood at the top of the stairs for exactly 2 seconds, letting her eyes adjust, rebuilding the layout from memory. She'd been to the fourth floor twice in 2 years, 8 months. Both times for mandatory department meetings she'd sat in the back of and left before the follow-up discussion. She remembered the orientation of the hallway, the position of the administrator's suite relative to the elevator bank, the fact that there was a secondary entrance to Callum's office through the records annex that most staff didn't know about because it predated the last renovation. She moved left instead of right. The records annex door was unlocked, which told her someone had come through it recently or was planning to. She pushed it open slowly, controlling the hinge, and stepped into the dark. The annex smelled like old paper and recycled air. Filing cabinets along both walls, a long table in the center, a single terminal on the near end. The connecting door to Callum's office was cracked open and a thin line of light came through it. Not the emergency strips, something handheld. A flashlight. She could hear someone moving inside. Methodical, not rushing. She pushed the annex door closed behind her, set her back to the filing cabinets, and moved toward the cracked door. Through the gap, a single figure at Callum's desk, laptop open, gloved hands working at the computer with the focused efficiency of someone who had done this before. Male, medium build, tactical vest under a civilian jacket. No weapon visible, but that meant nothing. At the desk edge, a portable hard drive was connected via cable. She could see the transfer indicator light blinking in the dark. She looked at the door gap. The hinges were on her side. She looked at the distance between the annex doorway and the desk. 12 feet. Maybe 13. She went through the door fast and low, and she was on him before he cleared the chair. He fought back, competently, better than Garrick's first man had. And they went sideways into the filing cabinet along the wall with enough force that a framed photo of Callum with someone important fell and cracked on the floor. He got an elbow into her ribs, which hurt, and she noted that it hurt and kept moving. She got her forearm across his throat from behind, seated it properly, and waited. 11 seconds. He went down. She held the position for another 3 seconds, the field standard because people who look unconscious sometimes aren't, then lowered him to the floor, removed his sidearm and the knife from his ankle holster, and straightened up. Her ribs protested. She ignored them and looked at the laptop. 43% transferred. She pulled the portable drive. The transfer stopped. She looked at the files on the screen for as long as she could afford, about 8 seconds. And what she saw was enough to recalibrate everything she thought she understood about why tonight was happening. The directory was labeled with a string of numbers, but the subfolder names weren't encrypted. They were in plain text. Billing records, patient data cross-referenced against insurance payouts, physician names alongside dollar amounts that were not any kind of legitimate compensation, and a folder simply labeled disposal log that she did not open because she didn't need to, because the name told her what was in it, and what was in it explained why someone had decided that a messy Tuesday night hostage situation was the perfect cover for making this server go dark permanently. Redstone Regional wasn't just a hospital. Someone had been using it as infrastructure, billing fraud, at a scale that required institutional cooperation, which meant it went above Callum, which meant there were names on this drive that people with resources had decided were worth a small army to protect. She pocketed the drive. Then she heard the stairwell door 1 floor below bang open and the sound of 3 sets of boots moving up. She took the secondary stairwell at the far end of the 4th floor, the fire escape access, older, with a metal door that opened onto the 3rd floor landing, and came down behind the second team instead of in front of them. It bought her 40 seconds. She used them to reach Pauline's position. The surgical waiting area was at the end of the 2nd floor corridor, past the OR suite, behind a set of locked double doors that Pauline had correctly identified as the most defensible position on the floor. 11 people. 4 patients who couldn't walk, 2 who could but were elderly, 5 staff including Pauline and Parks, and the 2 techs. And Dr. Voss, who was sitting in a chair with his forearms on his knees and his head down. Pauline had the door cracked when Claire knocked twice once. She opened it without speaking. "Second team is on 4, Claire said quietly. "They'll work their way down. I have maybe 4 minutes before they reach this floor." "What do we do?" Pauline asked. "You stay here. You keep this door locked. You do not open it for anyone except me or until you hear police." She looked around the room, at the faces, frightened, exhausted, one patient crying silently into the shoulder of a woman who might have been her daughter. She looked at Parks, the resident, who had finally peeled himself away from the supply room wall and looked like he was trying to decide who he was going to be. "Parks, anyone in here who needs active medical monitoring?" "Mrs. Aldridge," he said immediately. "Post-cardiac cath. She needs an eye on her rhythm." "You're doing that." "I'm a second-year resident. You know how to read a monitor and you know what a bad rhythm looks like. That's what she needs right now." She looked at him until he nodded. "The rest, stay low, stay quiet, stay away from the windows. This floor has 2 approach vectors, and both of them require passing OR2. I'll be in their way before they get here." Voss lifted his head. "Claire." His voice had a quality she hadn't heard from him before, stripped of the casual dismissiveness that was his default register, like the night had sanded it off. "What you did downstairs? How are you doing any of this?" She didn't have time for that. "I'll explain it when it's over," she said, which was a lie, but a useful one. Pauline touched her arm as she turned to leave. Brief, light, not stopping her, just contact. "Come back," Pauline said. "Working on it," Claire said. Ishimgat. She found her position at the junction where the second-floor corridor met the stairwell landing, behind the linen storage cart that housekeeping left in the alcove every night, and she'd walked past without registering for 22 months. Useful now. She had one sidearm with 11 rounds remaining, the knife from the ankle holster, and 12 feet of surgical tubing she'd grabbed from the supply cart on her way out of the ER. Old habit, carrying things that might be useful, you never knew. The second team came down the stairwell in the order she'd expected. Point man first, gap of 4 steps, then 2 together at the rear. Standard stack for an internal breach in a low-visibility environment. Professional, practiced, and in a straight corridor with clear sight lines. Very effective. She wasn't in a straight corridor. She was in the alcove. The point man cleared the stairwell door and turned right without seeing her because she was behind and left. And she let him go 3 steps before she used the surgical tubing, looped around the linen cart's upright bar, angled at ankle height, and pulled it across his path. He went down hard. Not fatal, not permanent, but he hit the linoleum with his full weight, and his weapon clattered, and he lost 2 seconds getting his orientation back. 2 seconds was plenty. She moved on the second man while he was still processing what happened to the first. He was faster than the man in coveralls had been, and he had his weapon up, and she had to redirect it twice before she could bring him out of the fight, and the second redirect put the muzzle toward the ceiling instead of her face, and he fired once, suppressed, still loud in the enclosed corridor, and the round went into the drop ceiling and insulation rained down on both of them. Third man. She heard him coming and threw herself left into the stairwell door, shouldering it open and going through because the corridor was now compromised and she was one person against a man with a firearm in a straight line, which were odds she declined. The stairwell. Concrete walls, metal steps, the emergency lighting strip along the floor. She went up instead of down, which was wrong by every tactical principle she'd learned. You didn't go higher when the objective was below you, but up was where the third man wouldn't expect her to go, and the unexpected bought seconds, and seconds were everything. She made the 3rd floor landing and stopped. Below her, she heard him on the stairs, moving carefully. He'd learned from what happened to his team. She looked at the stairwell above her. 1 more flight to 4. She went up. The 4th floor was different now. The figure she'd left unconscious in Callum's office had either come around or someone had found him, because the light was moving differently. Multiple sources. She could see the scatter under the corridor door when she came through the stairwell onto 4. She heard voices, low and controlled, the sound of a debrief happening in real time. They'd found the empty laptop, the disconnected drive, the unconscious man. They knew she had it. She flattened against the wall beside the stairwell door and counted the voices. 2. Maybe 3. She was recalculating when her phone, still on silent, had been since midnight, vibrated against her hip. She looked at the screen. Unknown number, local area code. She stared at it for 1 second, then answered, "Bennett?" The voice on the other end was male, mid-40s, the specific flat cadence of someone who had spent a long time in environments where emotional inflection was a liability. "If I'm reading this building's emergency poll correctly, you're on 4. She said nothing. "My name is Dern. I'm with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and I'm currently in a vehicle on Clearwater and 5th with 2 tactical agents and a very unhappy SWAT coordinator who wants to breach the building and can't get authorization. I need you to tell me what's on that floor." "How did you get this number?" she said. "Redstone HR has an emergency contact protocol, and your paperwork listed a next of kin as Vera Solano." Ms. Solano declined to answer. The secondary contact was a number that routes through a relay I recognized from a system I used to have clearance to access. A pause. "So," he said, "you want to tell me who you actually are?" "No," she said. "I want to tell you what's on the 4th floor. There are 2, possibly 3 armed individuals in the administrator's suite. There's a secondary team, 3 men, on 2, compromised, at least 2 of them down. There are 11 civilians in surgical waiting, 2nd floor, they're locked in. There's a man tied up in the annex on 4. She thought. "And there's a portable hard drive in my left jacket pocket with about 40% of a file transfer on it that I think is why all of this is happening." A long silence. "Okay," Dern said. "Don't move from your current position. I'll have authorization in 8 minutes. I have a 3rd team man somewhere between 2 and 4 who knows I came up," she said. 8 minutes is long." "I know." Another pause. "Can you hold?" She looked at the stairwell door. "Probably," she said. She made it 6 minutes before the 3rd man found her. He came up the south stairwell, the one she hadn't used, and she heard the door before she saw him, which gave her 2 steps of running start before he cleared the frame. She didn't fight him this time. She went for the stairwell railing and went over it. 1 floor down. The landing below. She caught the railing on the 3rd floor and her shoulders took the impact, and one of them did something that wasn't quite a pop, but was in the direction of one. And she lost 2 seconds to the white flare of it before she could move her arm again. Not dislocated, probably not. She'd know in an hour when the adrenaline cleared. Right now she filed it in the same category as her ribs and kept moving. The 3rd man came over the railing after her, which she hadn't expected. It was a committed move, not a cautious one, which told her he was running out of patience or time, or both. He landed harder than she had and came up slower, and by the time he was upright, she had put 2 closed doors and the length of the 3rd floor corridor between them. She went through the doors and locked them behind her. 3rd floor was orthopedics and long-term care. Empty at this hour, all patients transferred to the 2nd floor or sheltering in rooms with the door locks Pauline had told them to use. The corridor was long and straight and lit only by the emergency strips and the green exit signs at each end. She heard something that made her stop. Footsteps. But not from behind her. From the stairwell ahead. She stood in the middle of the corridor and looked left and right and understood that she had, in the way that things sometimes went in operations that didn't have a full team, miscalculated. The voice from Callum's office hadn't been 2 or 3 people. It had been at least 4, and one of them had been smart enough to anticipate the 3rd floor exit and come down to meet her. 2 vectors. 3rd man behind her, locked door buying maybe 90 seconds, at least 1 ahead. She looked at the rooms on either side of the corridor. 3rd door on the left, the MRI suite. She knew it because she'd taken a patient down for an emergency scan 7 months ago and spent 40 minutes waiting in the anteroom while the radiologist argued with an insurance coordinator on the phone. MRI suite. No windows. 1 entry point, and inside it, the largest, most powerful electromagnet in the building. She went through the door. The anteroom was small. A desk, 2 chairs, the equipment lockers where patients stored personal items before their scan. She moved through it quickly to the scanner room itself. The MRI unit was dormant, humming at low power the way they always did, the bore a dark circle in the machine's face. She positioned herself behind the console desk and looked at the control panel. She'd watched a radiologist run this machine once, had paid the kind of attention she paid to everything she encountered on the basis that she never knew what would be useful. She knew the emergency activation sequence, she knew the quench protocol, and she knew what happened to ferromagnetic materials when the magnet was brought to full power in an uncontrolled environment. Garrick's team and the second team had all carried steel-framed weapons. She looked at the door and waited. The anteroom door opened first. One man, the one from the 4th floor, she thought, medium build, the tactical vest. He came through fast and professional, and he had his weapon up, and she threw the chair from behind the console before he could acquire his sight picture, and it hit him in the forearms and knocked the muzzle wide. She was across the room before he recovered. They were in the scanner room now, and she hit the emergency activation panel with her elbow as she went past it. Not the full power sequence, just the ramp sequence, which took 90 seconds to reach operational field strength, and put the bore of the MRI machine between herself and him. He came around the left side. She went right. He was faster than she was by now. The shoulder was degrading her movement just enough. He got his hand on her left arm and slammed her into the machine housing, and the housing was fiberglass and didn't give, and her back took the impact, and she felt the portfolio of damage she'd been accumulating since 11:47 p.m. catch up with her all at once. Ribs, shoulder, the knee from the first fall. It arrived simultaneously, and she had approximately 1 second to decide how to use the pain instead of let it use her. She drove her elbow into his solar plexus. He doubled forward. She stepped aside, used his own forward momentum to redirect him, and his weapon, steel-framed as she'd expected, went into the magnetic field that was now ramping toward full strength. The gun left his hand like it had been invited. It hit the bore housing with a sound like a hammer on steel and stayed there. He looked at it, then at her. She was breathing hard. Her shoulder felt like it had its own heartbeat. She had one hand on the console for support and was doing a very poor job of looking like she didn't need it. "It's over," she said. "You've got nothing," he said. He looked at her hand on the console, at the way she was standing. "You're hurt." "Yes," she said. He started to move. The anteroom door opened. Both of them looked. The man in the doorway was wearing body armor with 3 letters across the chest, and he had a weapon that was very clearly not steel-framed pointed at the man from the 4th floor with the kind of absolute stillness that comes from training and intent in equal measure. "Down," said the man in the doorway. "On the floor. Now." Behind him, 2 more figures in identical armor, and behind them, filling the anteroom with a quiet that felt different from all the quiet that had come before it, the specific organized pressure of people who had just taken control of a situation. The man from the 4th floor went to his knees. Claire let go of the console. Her legs held. Barely. The first federal agent came through the scanner room door and looked at her with the expression of a person reassessing something they had walked in expecting to understand. "You Bennett?" he said. "Yes," she said. "Dern's outside. He wants the drive." "Tell him to come get it himself," she said. "I'm not walking down 4 flights of stairs right now." The agent looked at her shoulder, her ribs, the way she was holding herself together through what was clearly a significant amount of will and a decreasing amount of everything else. He pulled his radio. "Sir," he said into it, "you're going to want to come up to 3. She lowered herself to the floor beside the MRI console, controlled, deliberate, because collapsing was a choice she was still refusing to make, and pressed her back against the cool fiberglass housing and breathed. In the magnetic field above her, the weapon was still stuck to the housing. The machine hummed. The emergency strips threw their red light across the floor. She was still holding the drive in her left hand. She looked at it. The transfer indicator light was off now, just a small black rectangle in her palm. 43%. She wondered if it was enough. The stairwell door at the end of the corridor opened again, and this time what came through it was not a man in tactical gear, but a woman in her 50s in a rumpled suit jacket with an FBI badge on her belt and the look of someone who had driven very fast from somewhere to get here and had not had time to be angry yet, but was building toward it. She came through the scanner room door and stopped. She looked at the man being cuffed on the floor. She looked at the MRI machine and the weapon attached to its housing. She looked at Claire, sitting against the console with her back straight and her face composed and the drive in her hand. "I'm Special Agent Dern," the woman said. Claire looked at her. "You said you were mid-40s and male." "I said my name was Dern," the woman said. "You made the rest up." She crouched down to Claire's level. Her eyes were sharp and quick-moving, the kind that missed very little. "You want to tell me how a trauma nurse took apart 3 tactical teams in a regional hospital in Ashford?" "No," Claire said. "You're going to have to eventually." "Eventually?" Claire said. "I'll be debriefed by people with the clearance level to ask that question. Right now I want to know if my staff is safe, and I want someone to look at this shoulder." Dern studied her for a moment. "Your staff is safe," she said. "All 11. Including a Dr. Voss who apparently won't stop trying to give a statement to anyone who'll listen." She glanced at the drive. "That what I think it is?" Claire held it out. Dern took it carefully, the way you took things that mattered. "Dario Vela," Claire said. "He's an OR2. He needs someone to check in with Dr. Strauss." "Already done." "And Marco Vela was in custody as of 6 minutes ago. He came downstairs voluntarily and sat on the curb outside with his hands up. My guys almost didn't know what to do with him." Dern stood up. She flagged one of her agents. "Get a medic up here." Then she looked back at Claire. "You have any idea what's on this drive?" "Enough," Claire said. "Financial records, billing fraud, a folder called disposal log that I didn't open because I didn't need to." Something moved in Dern's expression. Not surprise. Confirmation. "We've been building a case on Redstone's administrative structure for 16 months, she said quietly. "We had the pattern but not the records. Someone inside the hospital kept the primary server clean and moved the actual data to a local backup that was never connected to the network audit." "Callum," Claire said. Dern didn't confirm it. She didn't need to. The way she didn't confirm it confirmed it. "How long before this goes somewhere?" Claire asked. "The drive gets analyzed tonight. What we can charge on in the next 72 hours depends on what's on it." Dern looked at her steadily. "You're going to have to come in for a full debrief, tonight or tomorrow at the latest." "I know." "And whoever you used to be," Dern said, "is going to come up." Claire looked at the humming machine beside her, the weapon still attached to its housing, the cracked ceiling tile in the corner where a round had gone through it 40 minutes ago from a direction she'd already stopped thinking about because it was over and what was done. "I know," she said again. A medic came through the door and crouched beside her with a kit and the professional expression of someone trained not to react to the condition of the person they were treating. She let him look in the shoulder, watched his face while he assessed it. "You've got a partial AC separation," he said. "When did this happen?" "About 20 minutes ago," she said. He looked at her. "And you've been moving, yes." He made a sound that was not quite professional and started putting together a compression wrap. She let him work. Outside in the corridor, she could hear the controlled sounds of the building coming back. More agents, more voices, the particular noise of a situation being documented and processed and handed over to the machinery that would manage it from here. Through the scanner room's one small window, she could see the sky starting to change. Not light yet, just the absence of the deepest dark. Somewhere below her, Pauline was unlocking the surgical waiting area doors. Voss was still talking to whoever would listen. Strauss was finishing up in OR2. Parks was watching Mrs. Aldridge's monitor and probably feeling things about his career he hadn't expected to feel at 2 a.m. on a Wednesday. And somewhere in this building, in a system she didn't have access to yet, were the names of everyone who had decided that a hospital full of sick people was a reasonable place to conduct a cleanup operation to protect their balance sheets. The medic finished the wrap and told her not to rotate the joint. "I know," she said. Dern was in the doorway, phone to her ear, talking to someone in the flat-clipped cadence of a person relaying information under time pressure. She looked at Claire once, a quick, assessing look, and then away. Claire put her back against the MRI housing and waited. She was very tired, the kind of tired that was specific to the hours after sustained operational stress. Not sleepiness, but a heaviness that settled into the muscles and the bones and the places behind the eyes and said quietly that you had run the account down to near zero and it was going to need time to fill back up. She'd been here before. She knew how it went. She closed her eyes for 3 seconds, just 3, then opened them. Dern had come back into the room. She was holding her phone at her side now and her expression had changed. Not the confirmation look from before. Something newer. Something that had just arrived. "We ran the building's security system from our vehicle," Dern said. "Full camera pull for the last 2.5 hours. Claire looked at her. "I need you to understand," Dern said carefully, "that what's on those cameras is going to be seen by a lot of people before morning." "Okay," Claire said, "and I need you to understand that I now have 17 missed calls from a number at the Department of Justice that I haven't answered yet because I wanted to look at you first and decide something." The medic had moved away. The room was as quiet as it was going to get. "Decide what?" Claire said. Dern looked at her for a long moment. Her face was the kind of careful that took practice to maintain. "Whether you're a problem or an asset," she said. Before Claire could respond, Dern's phone lit up again. She looked at the screen and her careful face changed for just a half second. Something tightened around the eyes, before she reassembled it. She turned the phone to show Claire the screen. It wasn't a missed call this time. It was a text from the DOJ number, and it contained 4 words and a surname that Claire recognized immediately, had hoped never to hear again in a professional context, because it was a name attached to a unit that officially didn't exist, and the 4 words were, "She's one of ours." Dern was watching her face. "You want to tell me now?" Dern said. And somewhere below them, in the parking structure on the 3rd level, the dark SUV that had been running its engine all night went dark. The SUV in the parking structure went dark at 2:14 a.m., and by 2:16 Dern had 2 agents on the 3rd level. They found the vehicle empty, engine still warm, door left open on the driver's side, which was either careless or deliberate, the kind of detail that could mean someone had left in a hurry or someone wanted them to think that. Dern didn't like either interpretation. She relayed the information to her team in the flat, controlled tone she used when she was managing something she didn't fully understand yet, which was not a comfortable state for her and showed only in the speed of her blinking. Claire watched her from the floor of the scanner room and said nothing. She was thinking about the 4 words on that text. "She's one of ours." The surname attached to them was Harwick, a name she hadn't spoken aloud in 2 years and hadn't seen written down in considerably longer. Harwick was not a person she'd worked with directly. Harwick was a person who sat at a level where working directly with people was no longer how things got done. The fact that Harwick's name had appeared on a DOJ number in response to her security footage told her something about the size of what was on that drive that she hadn't fully calculated yet. "The parking structure's clear," Dern said, phone back at her ear. She was pacing the anteroom in a tight circuit. 3 steps. Turn. 3 steps. "Get me the plate. Get me every camera between the structure exit and the interstate." She lowered the phone and looked at Claire. "Your coordinator ran." "I know," Claire said, "which means they know we have the drive." "They knew the moment I pulled it," Claire said. "They had someone watching the transfer indicator remotely. When it stopped at 43%, they knew." Dern stopped pacing. "You didn't tell me that." "I'm telling you now." Dern's jaw moved once. She was recalibrating, and she was doing it fast, which was the thing about Dern that Claire was revising her estimate of upward. She'd walked into the scanner room expecting to find a victim situation and had found something she couldn't categorize. And instead of resisting the recategorization, she was doing the harder thing of updating in real time. "If they know the transfer was incomplete," Dern said slowly, "they know we don't have the full record set." 43% of what's on that drive is enough to open the case, Claire said. "But you said you've been building for 16 months. You know what's missing better than I do." "The primary ledger," Dern said. "The disposal log is, we suspected it existed. If we can't show the full chain, the people at the top of this have lawyers who will turn the incomplete record into reasonable doubt in about 48 hours. She looked at the drive in her hand. 43% gets us the lower tier, maybe mid-level. The people who authorized the cleanup tonight, the ones who own the coordinator who just ran, They walk. Claire looked at the ceiling. She thought about the folder she hadn't opened, the one labeled disposal log. She thought about what disposal meant in the context of a hospital billing operation, and she thought about who it meant, and she thought about the fact that she had not opened it because she told herself she didn't need to. That had been a mistake. The other 27%, she said. Where does it live if not on the portable drive and not on Callum's server? Dern stared at her. How would you know it's not on the server? Because the coordinator told the team to take the drive first, then clean the rest. If the full record set was on the server, you'd take the server. You take the drive when the drive has something the server doesn't. She shifted against the housing, testing the shoulder. Still bad. Manageable. Callum kept a partition, something off the main system that the drive was a copy of. The original is somewhere else in this building. The room was quiet for a moment. The medic looked between them with the expression of a man who had treated physical injuries in a lot of complicated situations and had learned that the complications were rarely his business. You're saying there's another server, Dern said. I'm saying there's another copy, Claire said. Callum ran this operation out of this hospital for how long? Best estimate, 4 years. 4 years of records in a facility with this many compliance audits and accreditation reviews. He didn't keep the primary somewhere he couldn't physically access and destroy if he had to. It's in the building. Dern turned to her lead agent in the doorway. Get Callum. Dr. Morris Callum had been located 40 minutes earlier in his car in the hospital's executive parking lot, 3 levels below ground, engine running, phone in hand. He told the first agents who reached him that he was on a personal call. He told the second agent who opened his car door that he knew his rights. He told no one anything useful, which was the behavior of a man who had been prepared for this possibility and had a plan for it. They brought him to the 4th floor, his own office, the one with the cracked picture frame still on the carpet, and sat him in the chair across from his own desk. Claire came in last. He looked at her and something moved in his face that wasn't fear exactly. Callum didn't strike her as a man who did fear in any obvious way, but was a rapid recalculation. He'd seen her before, the way department chiefs saw nursing staff, present, peripheral, not particularly distinct. Whatever he'd known about this night's events, she hadn't been in the picture. She sat across from him and Dern stood to the side and the lead agent stood by the door. Dr. Callum, Dern said, you want to tell us about the partition? He looked at her, at the drive on the desk, at the cracked frame on the floor. His lawyer, he said, was on the way. Of course, Dern said pleasantly. We'll wait. The lawyer arrived in 22 minutes. A man named Stovall, hair still pressed from wherever he'd been when the call came, suit jacket over what was clearly pajama pants, which he seemed not to have registered yet. He conferred with Callum in low tones for 4 minutes, and then told Dern that his client had nothing to say. Dern nodded. She reached into the folder her lead agent handed her and placed 2 photographs on the desk. These are 2 of the men we took into custody tonight, she said, both carrying identification that puts them in the employment of a private security contractor called Meridian Operational Services. Meridian's registered address is a mailbox in Delaware. Their actual contracts, she placed a 3rd document on the desk, trace back through 2 shell layers to a holding company that shares a registered agent with a nonprofit that has donated approximately $1.2 million to Redstone Regional Medical Center over the past 3 years. Callum's face didn't change. Stovall said, I'm not done, Dern said. She placed a 4th document. The nonprofit's board of directors includes 3 names. One of them is a Dr. Morris Callum, listed as founding member. The room was quiet. Callum looked at the document. His face was doing the work of a man who was deciding, in real time, whether the prepared position he'd held for the past hour was still the right one. Claire had seen that calculation before, in different faces, in different rooms. It had a particular quality, the stillness of someone running numbers behind their eyes. My client, Stovall started. Tell them where the partition is, Claire said. Callum looked at her. Actually looked at her, with the full attention he had never once directed at her in 2 years, 8 months, and counting. You're a nurse, he said. Tonight I'm the person who pulled that drive, she said. And I know you kept a primary copy because that's what careful people do, and you have been very careful for 4 years. But the man who ran your exterior coordination left his car running when he ran, which means he panicked, which means the people above you are cutting their losses, and you are currently the highest-ranking person in this room who is going to take the weight of all of it. She held his gaze. Where's the partition? Something in his face shifted. Not collapse, he wasn't built for that, but a hairline fracture in the prepared position. Stovall touched his arm. Morris. The server room, Callum said. Sub-basement. Behind the HVAC panel on the east wall, there's a secondary rack. It's not on any building schematic. Dern was already moving. He simmed out. The sub-basement server room took 11 minutes to access, 4 minutes to find the secondary rack behind the HVAC panel, and approximately 3 minutes for the FBI's forensic tech, a woman named Osei, who had driven from the field office with Dern's team and had spent the past hour in a van in the parking lot being quietly furious about not being useful yet, to confirm that the rack was live and the data intact. 100% of the record set, including the disposal log. Claire stood in the doorway of the server room and heard Osei say the words and felt something she was not going to call relief because relief implied she'd been more worried than she'd let herself know, which was not a thing she was prepared to examine at 3 a.m. in a hospital subbasement with a partial AC separation and 2 bruised ribs. She felt it anyway. Dern came out of the server room and stood beside her in the corridor and didn't say anything for a moment. The fluorescent lights in the subbasement were back on. The building's power had been restored by the facilities team 20 minutes ago, floor by floor, the same way it had gone out. And in the full light, Dern looked tired and very alert in the way that exhaustion and a major break in a 16-month case produced in roughly equal measure. The disposal log, Claire said. Yes, Dern said. How many? A pause. 11 names, Dern said. Patients. Over 4 years. The log tracks? She stopped. Started again. It tracks individuals whose insurance claims were fraudulent enough to constitute evidence against the operation and whose medical records were subsequently another stop. Altered to reflect different outcomes. Claire didn't say anything. 3 of them died, Dern said. The log describes their cases as managed transitions. The corridor was very quiet. Callum didn't do this alone, Claire said. It wasn't a question. No, we have 12 names on the administrative side, 4 physicians, the contractor network. And above all of that, Dern looked at the wall. The coordinator ran. We don't have them yet, but with this, she nodded toward the server room, we will. Claire turned and started walking back toward the stairwell. Bennett, Dern said. She stopped. The camera footage, Dern said. My team has been watching it since we pulled the system, all of it, from 11:47 to now. She paused. My lead agent used to work Counterterrorism Joint Task Force. He's been doing this for 19 years. He watched 2 hours of footage, and then he called me and he said, She stopped. He said he needed me to explain what he was looking at. What did you tell him? Claire said. I told him I'd let you explain it yourself, Dern said. When you're ready. Claire looked at the stairwell door. I know what happens when I explain it, she said. Yes, Dern said. So do I. Then you understand why I haven't. Dern was quiet for a moment. The text from Harwick's number, she said. It came in the same minute my lead agent made that call. He sees the footage. He calls me. The text arrives. That's not a coincidence. No, Claire said. It's not. Someone in a position to monitor FBI field communications in real time knew the moment your footage was pulled. Dern's voice was careful, deliberate. And their response was to send 4 words and a clearance indicator that is above my pay grade to ask about. She held Claire's gaze. So I'm going to ask you the same question I asked upstairs, and this time I'm going to ask it knowing more than I did. Claire waited. Who are you? Dern said. The stairwell door was right there. 17 steps to the first floor. The hospital was full of federal agents now, full of activity, full of the machinery of consequence grinding into motion. I'm a trauma nurse at Redstone Regional Medical Center, Claire said. "I've been here 2 years and 8 months. Before that, I was somewhere else doing something else, and the people who need to know about it already do." "And the people who don't need to know?" "Don't need to know," Claire said. Dern looked at her for a long moment. Then she made a sound that was not quite a laugh. Something drier, more reluctant. "Okay," she said. "For now." By 4 a.m., the hospital was divided into sectors. The ER was a crime scene, taped, documented, being processed by a forensics team that had arrived in 2 vans and spread across the unit with cuetras and collection kits and the methodical focus of people who treated physical evidence as a language they were fluent in. The corridor outside OR2 had 2 agents posted. The sub-basement was restricted to Osei's forensic tech team and 2 federal supervisors who had arrived from a field office 40 minutes north and immediately taken charge of the server room in the way that people took charge of things they'd been looking for a long time. Callum was in federal custody. Stovall was on his 3rd phone call. The 12 individuals named in the administrative tier of the billing operation were being located, one by one, through the pre-dawn hours. 3 were found at home. 2 were found at a private medical facility 2 towns over that was now of significant interest to the investigation. 1 did not answer his door, which generated a separate problem that Dern delegated to her second agent while she stayed at Redstone. Garrick and his team were processed, transported, booked. The 3 men from the second team who were ambulatory were likewise. The man from the janitor coveralls had a prior federal record, which simplified some things and complicated others. Marco Vela was in a federal interview room at the field office, having accepted the curb outside the hospital as the correct location for a man who understood his situation had become too large for him. The preliminary read, according to Dern's second agent, was that Marco had information about the organization that had contracted Garrick's team, information he was willing to exchange for his brother's medical bills to be cleared, which was both the most transactional offer anyone had made all night, and, in its own way, the most human. Dario Vela was out of surgery, stable. Dr. Strauss had used the phrase textbook repair in her post-op note, which was the highest compliment Nadia Strauss gave and which she awarded sparingly. Claire was in the surgical waiting area on the 2nd floor, sitting in one of the chairs she'd directed 11 frightened people into 4 hours ago. Her shoulder was wrapped, her ribs had been assessed by the medic and confirmed bruised but not fractured, and someone had found her a cup of coffee that she was holding mostly for the warmth, because the adrenaline was fully gone now, and she was cold in the specific way of a body that had spent several hours burning reserves it wouldn't have acknowledged having. Pauline sat 2 chairs over. She'd refused to leave the building when the agents offered transport. She was still in her scrubs, with a Mylar emergency blanket around her shoulders that one of the paramedics had given her and that she wore with no apparent self-consciousness. They'd been sitting in silence for about 6 minutes. 2 years and 8 months, Pauline said. Yes, Claire said. You've been here 2 years and 8 months. Pauline looked at the wall. I've worked nights with you for almost all of it. I know. And I don't know anything about you. You know I take my coffee black, Claire said. You know I always restock the thoracic trays even when it's not my section. You know I covered your shift the night your mother was in the hospital. Pauline was quiet for a moment. I know all of that, she said. And tonight I found out that was like 4% of who you actually are. Claire didn't say anything. I'm not angry, Pauline said. She sounded like she was checking this against the facts of her own feelings and finding it to be accurate, if not simple. I don't know what to do with it. Most people don't, Claire said. Were you ever in danger? Before tonight, I mean. While you've been here? No. She thought about it. This wasn't about me. I was incidental. You were incidental, Pauline repeated slowly. You single-handedly. I was in the building, Claire said. Anyone who could do what I can do would have made the same choices. But no one else could do what you can do. Pauline turned to look at her directly. That's the part you keep skipping over. Claire held her coffee with both hands and looked at the middle distance and didn't answer, because Pauline was right, and the answer was yes, and she didn't know yet what to do with the fact that a floor full of frightened people had seen her do it. The waiting area door opened and the lead agent, The one who'd been doing this for 19 years, the one who'd called Dern from the camera footage, leaned in. "Bennett," he said, "Dern needs you. We've got something." About. Something was the coordinator. He'd made it to the interstate. A state police unit had pulled a dark SUV at a traffic stop 12 miles north on an unrelated matter at 3:51 a.m. Plate check, registration expired. And the driver had provided identification that came back with a 3-second delay on the federal system, which meant a flag, which meant the trooper had kept him at the vehicle while dispatch called it in. The delay in the federal system was not a glitch. It was a marker that Dern's team had placed on the coordinator's cover identity 16 months ago on the reasonable assumption that he would run if the operation was ever compromised. They had him. His name, his real name, or at least the one the DOJ had for him, was Terrence Lowell. 47. Former private intelligence contractor with a history that went through 3 different agencies before it disappeared into the kind of administrative fog that accumulated around people who were very good at their work and very careful about documentation. He'd managed the Redstone operation from a distance for the past 3 years, providing the connection between Callum's hospital-level fraud and the investment network above it that had found the operation's returns worth protecting at any cost, including the cost of 11 people in a hospital ER at midnight. Dern briefed Claire in the 4th-floor corridor at 4:22 a.m. because Claire had asked, and Dern had decided, sometime in the past 2 hours, that Claire had earned the right to hear things as they developed rather than in a formal debrief afterward. "Lowell is being transported to the field office now," Dern said. "With what's on the drive and what's on the secondary rack, we have enough to hold him on the federal conspiracy charge without bail. The investment network above him is the next layer, and that," she exhaled, "that is going to take longer." "But you have the names," Claire said. "We have the names," Dern said. "And with Callum cooperating," "He's cooperating?" Dern's expression shifted into something that was not quite a smile. "He started talking at 3:40. Stovall advised against it. Callum apparently decided that Stovall's advice was no longer in his best interest." She paused. "He knew about the disposal log. He says he didn't authorize it, that it was Lowell's team acting independently. But he knew." Claire said nothing. "He cried," Dern said, with the flat observation of someone who had watched a lot of people cry in interview rooms and had long since stopped calibrating whether the tears were about guilt or about consequences. "For what it's worth." "It isn't," Claire said, "worth anything." "No," Dern agreed. "Not to the 11. The corridor was quiet for a moment. "The footage," Claire said. Dern looked at her. "You said your lead agent watched it and called you," Claire said. "And then it gets submitted as evidence, and then it becomes part of a federal court record," Dern said. "Yes." A pause. "There are mechanisms. Classification requests, protective orders, redaction of specific elements that relate to national security. Whether those apply here depends on—" "Harwick," Claire said. "Yes." "Have you spoken to them?" "Not yet." Dern looked at her steadily. "I was going to, in the next hour. I was going to tell them that I have a witness whose cooperation and physical evidence were material to the resolution of a 16-month federal investigation, and that I would appreciate guidance on how to handle the documentation in a way that protects that witness's circumstances." Claire studied her face. "And if they say the circumstances don't warrant protection? Then I'll tell them what I observed tonight," Dern said, "which is that a trauma nurse at a regional hospital made decisions under extreme duress that saved 14 civilian lives, contained 2 armed teams, secured critical evidence, and demonstrated judgment and restraint that most people I've worked with in 22 years in federal law enforcement would not have managed." She held Claire's gaze. "And then I'll file my incident report exactly as I observed it, because that's what happened." It was the most Claire had ever heard Dern say in a single run. She looked at the woman in the rumpled suit jacket and found that her estimate, which had been revising upward since the scanner room, had reached a stable point. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me yet," Dern said. "There's still a piece I haven't told you." The stairwell door opened at the far end of the corridor. Dern's lead agent, the 19-year man whose name was Rourke, came through it with the particular energy of someone carrying information that had just changed the shape of the morning. The disposal log, Rourke said. He was looking at Dern, but the second look came to Claire, and it had a quality she recognized. The way people looked at you when they'd seen footage and were recalibrating what they were seeing now in person. Osei got into the cross-referenced files. The 11 patients. He paused. One of them is still alive. Dern straightened. The log said managed transition, which we assumed meant Rourke stopped. One of them is listed as transferred to a long-term facility out of state. Osei pulled the receiving facility. It's not real. The facility doesn't exist. So they transferred her to a facility that doesn't exist, Dern said. Her name is Ren Adler, Rourke said, 58. She was a patient here 14 months ago. She was a bookkeeper. Claire looked at him. She was Callum's bookkeeper, Rourke said, before the operation scaled. She kept the physical ledgers for the first year. When the operation moved to the digital system, she became... He stopped again. The log entry says liability addressed, but she's not dead. She's somewhere. And if she's somewhere and she can still talk, she's the original record, Claire said. She's the original record, Rourke confirmed. Everything we have on the drive is the digital reconstruction of physical ledgers that Ren Adler kept by hand. If she's alive and we find her, every defense that Callum's team builds gets dismantled, Dern said. She was already pulling her phone. Rourke, get Osei to start tracing every financial transaction associated with that shell facility. Anything that shows regular payments, maintenance costs, a recurring vendor, something. Rourke was gone before she finished. Dern turned to Claire. This is the piece I didn't tell you, she said, because I didn't have it until now. Claire looked at the corridor, at the cracked office door, at the carpet where Callum's picture frame still lay in two pieces. She thought about a bookkeeper named Ren Adler, 58 years old. Keeping physical ledgers, the kind with lined paper and ink, the kind that existed in the tangible world in a way that digital records never quite did. Keeping them for a man she'd trusted, probably. Working in a place she'd probably been glad to have. And then becoming, in the language of a disposal log, a liability addressed. Shipped somewhere that didn't exist, 14 months ago. She's been in custody, Claire said. Not dead. In custody. Somewhere that Lowell controls where she can be kept without being found and brought out if she ever becomes useful. Dern was looking at her. Lowell ran tonight, Claire said, and he was caught 12 miles north. He didn't have time to make calls, but the moment he's processed and his lawyer gets to him, he'll arrange for Ren Adler to become dead, Dern said. Yes, Claire said, which means we have hours, Claire said, maybe less. Dern had the phone to her ear before the word finished. Her voice, when she spoke into it, was the flat, fast cadence of a person giving instructions that couldn't wait for morning. Claire stood in the corridor alone for a moment. She thought about 14 months, the length of it, the weight of it, the particular endurance required to survive something like that. Not physically, though that was part of it, but the sustained act of waiting in a place no one knew existed, for people who might never come. She knew something about waiting, about the shape of it from the inside. She pushed off the wall and walked toward the stairwell. There was a room somewhere in this building with a window that faced east. She wanted to see when the sky started to change. She was 3 steps from the stairwell door when her phone, the personal one, the one that had received Dern's call 3 hours ago, vibrated. Not a call this time. A text. From a number she did not have saved, with an area code that belonged to a state she had not been in for 2 years. 3 words, no punctuation. She's already gone. Claire stopped. She read the message again. Then she looked at the stairwell door and at the phone in her hand and at the clock that read 4:47 a.m. And she understood that whoever had sent the 3 words knew about Ren Adler, knew that the federal team had just found the disposal log entry and had known it fast enough to send a message before Dern had even finished her phone call, which meant there was a leak. Not in Dern's team. The timing was too tight for that. Rourke had delivered the information 90 seconds ago. There hadn't been time. The leak was in the system that had been watching this case for 16 months. The same system that had put a flag on Terrence Lowell's cover identity. The same system that had sent 4 words and a surname when Claire's footage was pulled. The leak was somewhere above Dern, and whoever sent the 3 words was either warning her or taunting her, and she did not yet know which one, and she did not know if Ren Adler was dead or moved or simply somewhere new. That would take time she didn't have to find. She looked at the number again. Area code belonging to a state she had not been in for 2 years. A state where, in a building she'd never been cleared to photograph, the unit she'd worked for had maintained its administrative offices. She stood very still in the 4th-floor corridor of Redstone Regional Medical Center and held the phone and felt the situation shift beneath her, the way the ground shifted in certain environments. Not a collapse, not yet, but the first geological signal that what you were standing on was not as stable as it had appeared. Then she turned around and walked back toward Callum's office, where Dern was still on the phone. She needed to ask a question she did not want to ask, and the answer was going to change the shape of everything that came next. Dern was still on the phone when Claire walked back into Callum's office. She waited in the doorway. She didn't interrupt. She watched Dern's face while she listened to whoever was on the other end, and she read what was there. The controlled neutrality of a person receiving information that was confirming something they hadn't wanted confirmed. And she knew before Dern lowered the phone that they were already looking at the same problem from different angles. Dern hung up. "You got a message," Claire said. It wasn't a question. 30 seconds ago. Dern set the phone on Callum's desk. "From my supervisor at the field office. He says the Adler entry in the disposal log is, and I'm quoting him, a matter of ongoing federal sensitivity that should be routed through proper channels before any investigative action is taken." The room was quiet. "Proper channels," Claire said. "Yes." "At 5 in the morning?" "Yes." They looked at each other across the desk where Callum's laptop had been, across the cracked picture frames still on the floor, across the accumulated wreckage of a night that had started with a ceiling shot and had arrived here, at this particular silence, in this particular room. "My supervisor," Dern said carefully, "has been with the Bureau for 31 years. He does not call me at 5 in the morning about proper channels unless someone above him called him first." "Someone who knew about the Adler entry," Claire said. "Within the last 3 minutes," Dern said. "Yes." Claire looked at the phone in her own hand. The 3-word text. She held it up and Dern read it, and her expression didn't change, which was its own kind of change. "Area code," Dern said. "Yes." Yes," Claire said again. "I know what it is." Dern sat down in Callum's chair, not in the practiced way of someone taking authority, but in the way of a person who needed a surface to think against. She pressed both hands flat on the desk and looked at them. "If the leak is above my supervisor," she said slowly, "then Lowell has a contact inside the system that has been managing this investigation from the outside for 16 months. Which means the flag on Lowell's cover identity wasn't just a tracking measure," Claire said. "Someone put it there to know when he ran. Not to catch him, to know." Dern's hands went still on the desk. "To know when the operation was compromised," she said, "so they could move Adler before we found her." The silence in the room was the specific quality of 2 people arriving at the same place from different directions and finding it worse than either of them had expected. Claire looked at the window. Outside, Ashford was still dark, but the darkness had a different texture now. The hour before dawn, when the black started to thin at the edges, without yet becoming anything. She'd always found that hour clarifying. Not comfortable, just clear. "Your forensic tech," Claire said. "Oh, say. She's in the sub-basement with the full record set." "Yes." "Is she networked to the field office?" Dern understood the question immediately. "She's on a local air gap for the initial extraction. Nothing leaves this building system until she completes the forensic copy." She was already reaching for her phone. "If I tell her to complete the copy and encrypt it locally before she connects to anything external, then whatever's on that rack gets preserved before anyone above your supervisor can route it into sensitivity," Claire said. Dern made the call. 12 seconds. She spoke to Osei in the flat, rapid tone of someone giving instructions they needed, followed exactly and immediately. Osei, to her credit, asked no questions and said she'd have the encrypted local copy in 18 minutes. Dern put the phone down. "That buys us the record set," she said. "It doesn't find Adler." "No," Claire said. And without Adler's testimony, the top tier insulates itself, Claire said. Lowell takes the weight for the cleanup operation. Callum takes the weight for the hospital fraud. The people above Lowell, the investment network, the ones who made the decision to send a cleanup team to a hospital full of sick people, they have enough distance from the physical events that a good lawyer and a cooperative leak inside the system gives them reasonable doubt on everything that matters. Dern was quiet. You've been doing this for 22 years, Claire said. You know what that means. It means they walk, Dern said. Flat, tired, the tone of someone who had seen this particular architecture before and had never fully made peace with it. Claire looked at the 3 words on her phone again. She's already gone. She thought about the area code, about the unit that didn't officially exist and the administrative offices in the building she'd never been cleared to photograph, about Harwick's 4 words on the DOJ line, about the fact that someone in that system had sent her a text instead of sending it to Dern, which was a choice, and choices meant something. She typed back 1 word. Where? She set the phone face up on the desk, and they both watched it. 40 seconds. Then, a street address, out of state, and below it 2 more words, go now. Oh, she didn't take Dern. Dern argued, briefly and without real expectation of winning, and then did the thing that Claire was revising her estimate of her for continuously. She accepted the argument and started working the angle she could work, which was the legal infrastructure, the air-gapped copy, the chain of custody on the drive, the federal charges on Lowell and Garrick, and the rest that were solid enough to hold regardless of what happened above the supervisor level. If you find her, Dern said at the stairwell door. When? Claire said. Dern looked at her. When you find her, what she gives you. It needs to come back through a channel that can be used. If you... She stopped. If you arrive at that address in any capacity other than a private citizen concerned for the welfare of a missing person, what she tells you becomes complicated. I know, Claire said. And you can't. I know, Claire said again. I'm a nurse. I was in the neighborhood. Something in Dern's face moved. Not a smile. The shadow of one. Get her out, she said. I'll handle the rest. Claire went down the stairs and out through the ambulance bay, past the crime scene tape, past the forensics van, past 2 agents who looked at her and did not stop her, whether because Dern had said something or because she moved with the particular quality of a person who should not be stopped. And she got into her car in the staff lot and drove. What? The address was 2 hours and 11 minutes northeast of Ashford, which she covered in 1 hour and 48 minutes on roads that were empty in the way only pre-dawn roads were empty, like the world hadn't decided yet to be populated. She thought while she drove. She thought about what it meant that someone in Harwick's orbit had sent her the address. It meant one of 2 things. Either the leak that had tried to move Adler was not the only person in that system with knowledge of the situation, and someone else had been watching the same case from the same vantage point and had made a different decision about what to do with what they saw. Or it was a setup. Adler moved, address provided, Claire arriving to find nothing, the narrative of her involvement ending in a way that discredited anything she'd already done. She ran the odds on both possibilities for about 40 minutes and then stopped, because the odds didn't change what the right move was. The right move was the same either way. Go, see, assess, act on what was actually there instead of what she'd decided to expect. That was the only thing that had ever actually worked. The address resolved to a private medical facility outside a small town called Dunmore. Not the kind that appeared in insurance directories. The kind with a gate and a gravel drive and a sign that listed a name she didn't recognize because it had been created specifically to not be recognized. The kind that took patients who didn't need to be findable and provided the medical supervision necessary to keep them alive and compliant and silent. She parked on the road 200 meters from the gate and sat for a moment. No visible exterior security. 1 light on in the main building, ground floor. 1 vehicle in the lot. A sedan, not tactical, not government plated. The gate was a simple arm barrier, the kind operated by a keypad. She got out of the car and walked to the gate in the gray pre-dawn and looked at the keypad and tried the 4-digit combination that facilities like this used with a frequency that was almost poetic in its predictability. Sequential, year-based, the default they'd never gotten around to changing. 3rd try. The arm lifted. She walked in. Chit. The woman at the reception desk inside the main building was not security. She was by appearance and the name tag clipped to her cardigan, a night shift administrator named Yvette, and she looked at Claire with the surprised expression of someone who had not expected a visitor at 6:40 in the morning and was trying to decide if this was a problem. Claire showed her the nursing ID from Redstone. "I'm here to check on a patient," she said. "Ren Adler. I'm her care coordinator." Yvette looked at the ID and then at Claire. "We don't... Patients here aren't..." "I know," Claire said. "Her family asked me to come. They haven't been able to reach the facility and they're concerned about continuity of care." She kept her voice at the specific register of someone with institutional authority who was also being patient about using it. "If I could just see her for a few minutes and confirm she's stable, I can relay that to the family and we can sort out the rest during business hours." Yvette looked at the ID again. She was not a person who had been prepared for this situation. She had been prepared for a quiet, overnight shift in a facility that valued its quiet, and a woman with a nursing ID and a calm voice at 6:40 a.m. was not the kind of challenge she'd been trained to identify as a threat. "Room 7, Yvette said. "Down the hall. Left. She's sleeping." "Thank you," Claire said. "I won't be long." Whoop. Ren Adler was not sleeping. She was sitting up in the bed with the lights off and her hands in her lap, and the particular stillness of a person who had been in a place long enough to stop expecting anything to change. 58 years old, slight, with gray-streaked hair and eyes that adjusted to the door opening with the alertness of someone who had learned to attend to every sound. She looked at Claire. Claire looked at her. "I'm not from this facility," Claire said, keeping her voice low. "My name is Claire Bennett. I'm a nurse at Redstone Regional Medical Center in Ashford. 14 months ago, a federal fraud investigation found a disposal log that listed your name. Tonight, we accessed the primary record set from the hospital's sub-basement." She paused. "We know what you kept. We know why they put you here." Ren Adler's hands tightened in her lap. "Are you federal?" she said. Her voice was rough from disuse. "No," Claire said. "I'm a nurse who had a bad night and drove 2 hours because someone sent me your address." Something in Ren Adler's face, some long-held careful arrangement of it, cracked slightly. "Someone sent you," she said. "Yes." "From..." She stopped. Started again. "Did they give you a name?" "Harwick," Claire said. Ren Adler closed her eyes, just for a moment. When she opened them, they were wet, but her voice was steady. "I didn't think anyone..." She stopped again, looked at the window, at the gray light beginning to show at the edge of the curtains. "I have the originals," she said, "the physical ledgers, from the first year. I hid them before they moved me here. Someone I trusted kept them." "Where?" Claire said. "Are you going to get me out of here?" "Yes," Claire said. "Then I'll tell you on the way," Ren Adler said, and she pushed back the covers and put her feet on the floor with the deliberate movement of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this and was not going to waste a second of it. They were back in Claire's car and 2 miles down the road before Ren said a word. She gave Claire an address, a storage unit outside Ashford, a unit number, a combination lock code that she said from memory without hesitation, the way you remembered things you'd rehearsed against the possibility of a moment exactly like this one. Then she said, "There are 11 names in those ledgers, not patients, investors. The people who put money into the operation in year 1 before it went digital, before Callum decided they didn't need a human bookkeeper anymore." She looked at the passing road. "Those names are not in the digital records. I know because I compared them. When Callum moved everything to the server system, those 11 names disappeared." Claire kept driving. "They're the ones who walked," Ren said. "Aren't they?" "Not yet," Claire said. Ren turned to look at her. In the growing morning light, she looked tired in the way of someone who had been tired for so long it had stopped feeling like anything except baseline. But her eyes were sharp. "You said a federal agent has the digital records." "Yes." "Will they use them?" "She'll try," Claire said. She thought about Dern, about the 22 years, the rumpled suit jacket, the way she'd looked at the disposal log entry, and used the word managed with the care of someone handling something that had weight. She's the right person to try. And the physical ledgers? Change the case, Claire said. The digital records get you Callum and Lowell. The ledgers get you everyone above them. Wren was quiet for a moment. I kept them in my handwriting, she said. Every entry, dates, amounts, account numbers, signatures on the deposit confirmations. I kept everything because, she paused, because I knew what they were when I was doing it. I knew it was wrong. And I kept the records because I thought someday someone might need them, and her voice caught, just slightly. I needed to have done at least one right thing. The road was opening up ahead of them. The sun was coming now, still below the horizon, but lightening everything from the east in the incremental way of a thing that could not be stopped once it started. Claire didn't say anything for a moment. That was more than one right thing, she said. What? The storage unit was exactly where Wren said it was. The ledgers were exactly what she'd described. 6 of them, physical, bound in the institutional blue of old accounting books, filled in a meticulous hand that was the permanent record of every transaction in year 1 of an operation that had subsequently killed 3 people and warehoused a 4th for 14 months. Claire photographed every page with her phone. Then she called Dern. It was 7:23 a.m. Dern answered on the second ring, which meant she hadn't slept, which Claire had assumed. She told Dern what she had. She gave the location of the storage unit. She told her about Wren Adler, sitting in the passenger seat of her car, watching the storage unit's security light flicker off as the morning got bright enough to make it unnecessary. Dern was quiet for 3 seconds. You drove 2 hours, she said. 1:48, Claire said. Bennett. She's safe, Claire said. She's here. And the ledgers are here. What you need from her needs to come from a federal agent with a recorder, which means you need to come to her. Dern came. The next 4 hours were the machinery. Federal agents at the storage unit. A formal interview with Wren Adler conducted by Dern in the front seat of a government sedan parked outside a diner that wasn't open yet, with a recorder running and the 6 blue ledgers in an evidence bag on the back seat. A second forensic team dispatched to the private facility in Dunmore, which was now of significant interest across multiple federal jurisdictions. Yvette, the night shift administrator, gave a voluntary statement and provided facility records without resistance. She had not, it turned out, known what the facility was. She'd been told it was a private psychiatric care unit. She'd been doing her job. Most people were doing their jobs. That was the thing about operations like Callum's. They couldn't exist without a lot of people simply doing their jobs without asking the questions that would have changed what they were part of. The 11 names in the ledgers were cross-referenced against the investment network that Dern's team had been building toward for 16 months. 11 investors. 11 sets of transfers. 11 sets of returns on an operation that had, over 4 years, defrauded insurance companies, Medicare, and Medicaid of amounts that the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit would spend the next 3 weeks calculating with more precision than Claire had any desire to know. 3 of the 11 were located that morning. 2 more by afternoon. The remaining 6, the ones with better lawyers and faster reflexes, took longer, but the ledgers were physical and handwritten and signed and dated, and the chain of custody was clean, and clean chains of custody had a way of outlasting the speed of expensive legal maneuvering. Callum's cooperation, which had started at 3:40 a.m. and expanded through the morning as his lawyer's advice became increasingly irrelevant to his actual situation, filled in the architecture that the digital records and the ledgers left implicit. He gave dates, conversations, decision points. He gave the name of the physician who had managed the 3 patients in the disposal log whose deaths he claimed had been Lowell's decision and not his. The physician's name was in the digital records already, but Callum's oral account placed him in the room for conversations that the records alone couldn't. It was the kind of corroboration that made prosecutors stop qualifying their language. Terrence Lowell, processed and charged, and assigned a lawyer who understood immediately that his client's position was worse than it appeared, made one proffer through counsel at 11 a.m. that offered the name of his contact inside the federal system in exchange for a reduction on the obstruction charges. Dern accepted the proffer. The contact's name was an analyst 3 levels above her supervisor who had been feeding case status information to Lowell's network for the past 14 months. The analyst was arrested before noon. Claire was not present for any of this. She was in the hospital parking lot at 8:15 a.m., sitting in her car, because she had driven back to Ashford after Dern arrived at the storage unit, and she had not gone inside yet. She was looking at the building through the windshield. The crime scene tape was still on the ER entrance. 2 federal vehicles in the lot. 1 news van, which would become more, parked at the edge of the lot with a camera operator leaning against the door drinking coffee. She was very tired. Not the operational kind from the night, that had burned itself out somewhere on the road back from Dunmore. This was the older kind. The kind that had been accumulating for 2 years and 8 months of doubles covered and names mispronounced and a locker kept locked in a building where she'd deliberately been invisible. She thought about the question Pauline had asked. Were you ever in danger? Before tonight. The answer she'd given was true. The danger last night hadn't been about her. She'd been incidental, but incidental didn't mean it hadn't cost something. 2 years and 8 months of small erasures, of being the quiet woman nobody looked at twice, of doing the work correctly and thoroughly and being thanked by nobody and noticed by no one, and telling herself that was the shape of the life she'd chosen when she'd walked away from the other one. She'd chosen it. She still believed in the choice, but sitting in the parking lot at 8:15 in the morning with a wrapped shoulder and 2 bruised ribs and the residual adrenaline debt of a 6-hour operation she'd conducted alone, she let herself know that the choice had been hard, that it had cost the things choices cost. That was the thing people didn't tell you about quiet strength. Not the strength itself, which was real and available, and she was genuinely grateful to have it. The thing they didn't tell you was that using it without anyone seeing you use it required a specific kind of ongoing grief that didn't have a name but was always there, steady and low. The way a sound could be steady and low enough that you stopped registering it as noise and just incorporated it into the silence. She'd incorporated it for 2 years and 8 months. Last night had changed that, and she didn't know yet what she thought about the change. Her phone buzzed. Pauline. Are you in the lot? Voss said he saw your car. She typed back, yes. Pauline. Come inside. We ordered breakfast. The surgical waiting area on the 2nd floor had become, by 8:30 a.m., something between a debrief location and a makeshift family gathering. Pauline had gotten food from somewhere. A diner delivery, bags of it, spread across 3 of the waiting room tables. Parks was there, looking like he'd grown into something overnight without being sure yet what it was. The 2 techs. The security guard, whose name was Harold and who had been checked out medically and cleared and had declined to go home, which said something about him that Claire added to her assessment. Dr. Voss, who had given his statement 3 times to 3 different people and was now sitting with a coffee and the expression of someone processing a significant recalibration of what they thought they understood about the world. Dr. Strauss came out of the OR suite and joined them, still in scrubs, and accepted a breakfast sandwich from Pauline with the directness of a person who'd been working since the previous afternoon and was not going to have feelings about it until after she'd eaten. They made room for Claire. She sat, and someone handed her coffee, and for a while nobody said anything much, just the low conversation of people who'd been through something together and were still in the early stage of understanding what it had been. Voss broke the real silence. Claire, he said. He stopped, looked at his hands, started again. I owe you an apology that I don't have adequate language for yet. I've treated you like... Another stop. I've treated everyone on the nursing staff like support staff for my decisions, including you. Especially you, I think, because you never pushed back. She looked at him. I'm not asking you to forgive it, he said. I'm just telling you I know, that I see it, and that what I saw last night, he looked genuinely shaken in the way that men who had been comfortable for a long time got shaken when the comfort was demonstrated to have been built on a false foundation. I saw you save 14 lives in a situation where I couldn't move. You pulled a patient behind a curtain, she said. That's not... It's something, she said. You made a decision under pressure. It was the right call for that moment. She looked at him steadily. That's all any of us can do. He looked at her, and she thought he might say something else, something in the register of the kind of gratitude that was really about the person feeling it more than the person receiving it. Instead, he just nodded. Small, once. That was enough. At 10 a.m., Dern called. Claire stepped into the corridor to take it. The ledgers are authenticated, Dern said. Osei's team spent 2 hours on them. The handwriting matches a sample from Adler's personnel file at Redstone from 7 years ago. Every account number traces, every date lines up with the digital records. A pause. We have everything. All 11 investors, Claire said. 8 are in custody as of an hour ago. The remaining 3, Dern paused. 2 are in process. 1 is cooperating voluntarily through counsel. And Lowell's contact in the system. Suspended pending investigation. 3 others in the same division are being reviewed. Dern's voice had the quality of a person delivering information they'd been waiting a long time to deliver. This goes up further than a regional hospital fraud, Bennett. The investment network connects to 3 other healthcare facilities in 2 other states. This morning's arrests are the first tier. This case is going to be running for 2 years minimum. But Callum, Claire said, the physicians, the direct operators. Charged this morning, Dern said. Federal fraud, conspiracy, 3 counts of negligent homicide for the disposal log deaths. Lowell charged with kidnapping, conspiracy, 3 counts of murder in the first. The cleanup team charges cover the hospital operation. She stopped. The physician who managed the 3 patients, he was located at his home at 9 a.m. He did not resist. Claire stood in the corridor and looked at the fluorescent lights, which were back on and humming at their ordinary frequency, and felt the weight of all 11 names in those ledgers, and the 3 patients in the disposal log, and Ren Adler's 14 months in a facility that didn't officially exist. Ren Adler, she said, in federal protective custody. She has a lawyer now, pro bono, federal public defender's office. She's been interviewed twice. She's... A small pause. She's talking. She has a very good memory. Yes, Claire said. She does. There's one more thing, Dern said. Claire waited. The footage, Dern said. I spoke with Harwick's office this morning, 2 hours ago. She stopped. The request for classification was denied. Claire was very still. By Harwick? She said. By Harwick, Dern said. Personally, in writing. Another pause. The written denial says, and I'm reading directly, that the footage depicts a private civilian acting in the defense of others, and that classification would constitute an inappropriate use of national security apparatus to protect institutional interests. She stopped reading. It also says that the subject of the footage should be informed of the denial directly. Claire looked at the wall. So I'm informing you, Dern said. Who sent me the address? Claire said. The text. A pause. Someone I don't have clearance to ask about, Dern said. But the text came from a number attached to Harwick's office. Someone there made a decision about which direction to point things. She paused. I think you know why. Claire thought about the 3 words. The choice to send them to her personal phone instead of to a federal agent. Someone who had seen the footage and understood what they were looking at and had decided, in the space between seeing and acting, that the right thing to do was to give the information to the person most likely to do something useful with it. Not the cleanest chain of custody, but the right call. Sometimes they were the same thing, and sometimes they weren't. And the ability to tell the difference was a skill she'd spent years developing and would spend years more refining, and she was not done yet. Thank you, she said to Dern, for the denial. Thank Harwick, Dern said. I just made the call. What? The news van in the parking lot became 4 news vans by noon. The story broke in pieces, the way these things always did. Federal arrests, a hospital fraud operation, a hostage situation that had been resolved without civilian casualties, a private facility in Dunmore that federal agents had entered at 9 a.m. Someone on the arrest team talked to someone they shouldn't have, and by 1 p.m. there were fragments circulating about security footage depicting a hospital staff member who had contained 2 armed teams, and by 2 p.m. the fragments had a name attached to them. Claire was not in the hospital by then. She was in her apartment 3 miles away, shower, clean clothes, sitting at her kitchen table with the shoulder brace the medic had given her and a glass of water she kept forgetting to drink. She was looking at the wall, not really thinking, just existing in the specific quiet of the aftermath. Her phone had been buzzing continuously for 40 minutes. She'd answered 3 of them, Dern, Pauline, and a number she didn't recognize that turned out to be a journalist who'd gotten her personal number from somewhere she was going to have to figure out. She declined to comment to the journalist and turned the phone face down. Someone knocked on her door at 2:30 p.m. She opened it and found Pauline, in civilian clothes, holding a bag that smelled like the diner 2 blocks over that made the kind of soup that was appropriate for people who had bruised ribs and hadn't slept. "I wasn't going to call first," Pauline said, "because you'd have told me you were fine." "I am fine," Claire said. "I know," Pauline said. "You can be fine and also let someone bring you soup." She held up the bag. "Those aren't mutually exclusive." Claire stepped back and let her in. They ate at the kitchen table. The TV was off. Outside, Ashford went about the business of a Wednesday afternoon. Traffic, someone's dog barking, the sound of the school 2 blocks over releasing for the day, the ordinary noise of a city that had not known what was happening in its hospital the night before, and was now learning it in the fragmented, out-of-sequence way that news worked. "They're calling you a hero," Pauline said. "I know," Claire said. "Is that—" Pauline looked at her. "Is that going to be a problem for you?" Given what I used to be," Claire said. "Yes." Claire thought about Harwick's denial, the written record, the footage that would now be submitted as evidence in a federal case and would be, in some form, publicly available when the case went to trial. She thought about the challenge coin in her locker and the photograph and the folded number she hadn't called in 2 years. "I don't know yet," she said. It was the most honest answer she had. "I made a choice 2 years ago to step away from one thing and become something else. I don't think last night changes that choice, but it changes—" She stopped. "Some things are harder to put back once they've been seen." "Maybe they shouldn't be put back," Pauline said. Claire looked at her. "I mean—" Pauline turned her soup cup in her hands. "You spent 2 years being very good at your job and not letting anyone know how good you were at it. And I understand some of that was about what you came from, but some of it—" She looked up. "Some of it felt like you'd decided you didn't deserve to take up space." The kitchen was quiet. "That's not what I decided," Claire said. "Okay," Pauline said. "Then what?" Claire was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the school released its second wave of the afternoon, and the street got briefly noisy and then settled. "I decided that being the person nobody noticed was the safest version of starting over," she said. "Safest for everyone. For the people I worked with, and—" She stopped. "For me. Because if nobody was looking at me, I couldn't fail in front of anyone." Pauline absorbed that. "And now everyone's looking," she said. "Yes," Claire said. "Now everyone's looking." 3 weeks later, in a conference room at the federal field office 40 minutes north of Ashford, with Dern and 2 federal prosecutors and a representative from the U.S. Attorney's Office present, Claire gave the formal debrief she'd agreed to on the condition that specific elements of her background remain sealed in a separate classified addendum that only cleared parties could access. Harwick's office signed off on the arrangement the same morning it was proposed. The formal charges were filed that same week. Morris Callum, federal health care fraud, conspiracy, 3 counts of negligent homicide. Terrence Lowell, federal conspiracy, kidnapping, 3 counts of first-degree murder. The Meridian Operational Services Network, RICO. Garrick and his team, assault with a deadly weapon, unlawful detention, federal conspiracy. The second team, same. The analyst who'd been feeding information to Lowell's network, obstruction of justice, accessory after the fact. The 8 investors from the ledgers were charged with conspiracy and fraud. 3 cooperated in exchange for reduced sentences, 5 did not, and their trials were scheduled for the following year. Ren Adler testified twice before a grand jury. She was clear, precise, and detailed in the way of a person who had been keeping the account in her head for 14 months and knew every line of it by heart. The physical ledgers were admitted as evidence. Her testimony established the original investment structure that the digital records alone couldn't fully document. She moved to a city where she had a sister, 4 months after her release from protective custody. She sent Claire a card, no return address. The card said, in the same meticulous handwriting that had documented 4 years of fraud, Thank you for driving. Well, on a Tuesday morning in the sixth week after that night, Claire Bennett walked through the main entrance of Redstone Regional Medical Center and went to work. The crime scene tape was long gone. The ER had been cleared, documented, and restored. New ceiling tiles where the rounds had gone through, fresh paint on 2 walls, the linoleum scrubbed to the same institutional shine it had always had. The supply carts were in their places. The monitors beeped in their rhythms. Pauline was at the nursing station. She looked up when Claire came in and said, "Tran called out sick again," with the tone of a person reporting the permanent condition of the universe. "I'll cover," Claire said. "I figured," Pauline said. "Coffee's fresh." She got her coffee. She put her bag in her locker, padlocked. The combination the same, the coin and the photograph and the folded number still inside. And she tied on her ID badge and walked to the first bay to check vitals on the patient who'd come in overnight with chest pain and was stable and bored and wanted to talk to someone. She talked to him. She did his vitals, listened to his complaint about the hospital's parking structure, answered his question about when he'd be discharged with the honest answer of she didn't know, but she'd find out, and made a note in his chart and moved to the next bay. Dr. Voss came in at 7. He said good morning to her by name, her correct name, both syllables, no hesitation. It was a small thing. It cost him nothing. It wasn't nothing. The morning moved, the way mornings in an ER moved, fast and then slow, and then fast again. The rhythm of it so embedded in her after 2 years and 8 months that she stopped thinking about the rhythm and just worked inside it. A laceration in Bay 3 that needed irrigation and sutures, a pediatric fever that turned out to be nothing serious. An elderly man who'd fallen at home and was frightened and needed the information delivered slowly enough that he could absorb it. She sat with him for 11 minutes. She didn't document the 11 minutes anywhere. She just gave them to him because that was what he needed, and the supply was finite for everyone, and she had some to give. At 10 a.m., she was at the supply cart near Trauma Bay 2, cross-checking a restock sheet against actual inventory. She caught herself doing it and was briefly, quietly aware of how ordinary it was. The same cart, the same sheet, the same humming fluorescence, the same work. But she was not exactly the same person who had stood here 6 weeks ago. Something had been seen that couldn't be unseen, including by herself. The careful smallness she'd constructed, the deliberate invisibility, the chosen erasure, had served its purpose and she'd outgrown it, the way you outgrew things that had been exactly right for the person you used to be. She was still that person. She was also more than that person. She didn't know yet what the more looked like exactly, but she'd been uncertain about important things before and had found that uncertainty was not the same as being without direction. The direction was here. The work was here. The patients in the bays and the colleagues at the station and the supply cart that always needed restocking. She was a trauma nurse. She was very good at it. She was, as it turned out, also other things, and the other things didn't cancel the nursing. They were the reason for it. All the years she'd spent learning to save people's lives in conditions that couldn't be planned for had been preparation for a Tuesday night shift in Ashford that nobody planned for either. The skills you carry don't know what room they're in. They go where you go. They're available when the door opens, whatever's on the other side. She finished the restock sheet, accurate to the last item. Somewhere down the hall, a monitor started its alarm and she was already moving before she consciously decided to, the way she always was, the way she had always been. She moved without fanfare, without announcement, without anyone watching. She moved because that was the job, and the job was real, and the people at the end of the hall needed her, and she was exactly and precisely enough to meet what was required. That was the truth of her. Not the footage, not the headlines, not the federal case number attached to her name in a sealed addendum. The truth was the motion, the immediate, unhesitating, competent motion toward the thing that needed doing. She'd spent 2 years being invisible, and she'd spent one night being seen, and neither one of those things was the whole of who she was. The whole was this: she showed up, every time, for everyone who needed it. That was what quiet strength actually looked like from the inside. Not the impressive parts, not the moments anyone would put in a headline. Just the continuous choice made every day to use what you had for something that mattered. She was still making it. She always would.